I would like first to welcome our panel of Dayanim, judges, Rabbi Moses, Uchaba, Maharat Feinot, Maître Susan Little, Maître Azintot, Dr. Karen Tadalaba, for accepting the invitation. Secretary 3, please understand that the next couple of hours or so, hour and a half, 2 hours, this Beit Knesset is now the court, okay? And as in the Knesset, we do participate in Tefillah, but during the time when there are presentations going on, there's no comments from anyone. You must be quiet at all times, like just in the house, okay? Tefillah is quiet. There are times we participate, but today, asking Bakasha to stay quiet. I'd like to thank a few individuals who are behind. Always we forget the tech department, so I say to about the tech department for always being there for us. David Puwala, who worked also with some of our students. Aaron Lehrer for also making sure that you judges got everything needed as well, and definitely Shimon Gabriel, who has been spending hours and hours and hours with our students to help them. The idea is, guys, Secondary 3, you see what's going on, you see some of your friends are here, and to continue as the channel in the future, Secondary 4 and 5, will be part of the Moot course. That's the idea. And that's something to be proud of what we do here at Herzliya. I want to say just a point for the judges to understand that when we go to Prisma, many schools, or almost 30 schools we're competing with, we probably have the highest number of participants. The students who actually, we saw about 45 students who initially wanted to begin with the case, and as you know, selecting and so on, but we left with 5 amazing groups. But the idea is, so we are, as opposed to other schools that I spoke to some of my colleagues in the States, they don't get so many students involved. So we are proud of what we do here. I'd like now to welcome, and the next phase, notre directrice, Madame Kim Castillet, s'il vous plaît, pour venir dire le cas et vous parler. Merci beaucoup.
Making teaching and learning meaningful and showing students the relevance of modern day applications of the study of Jewish texts is a raison d'être à l'école Herzliya. Moot Court is the illustration, the perfect model of this. Students study rabbinical sources and are asked to use their knowledge and understanding of these texts to make contemporary and difficult ethical decisions. You are about to hear from our students as they interpret rabbinic texts and make the most insightful connections to a very challenging case. This brings them the skills of critical thinking and the love of lifelong learning. Our students, our Letterman scholars, are taking their own personal time, not school time, to pursue this study, connecting to our distant past, to our present, and to our future, understanding that our Torah is a living document, truly making Torah study, Torah Lishma. A special thank you to the Letterman Foundation for their steadfast support. Thank you to our esteemed judges, Rabbi Moses, Maharat Feinot, Dr. Kalin, Maître Gregory Adenpat, Maître Susan Little. Thank you to David Azrat and Mohamed Shimon Ariel for the guidance of our students. I am now going to read the case in its entirety, as if the details are crucial and important. The statement of claim of our case. Judy Cohen. In October of 2016, I, Judy Cohen, a 32-year-old public school teacher living in Miami, Florida, began feeling tired even though I had been getting enough sleep. Over the next couple of weeks, I found that the fatigue began to distract me from my teaching. I started experiencing occasional dizzy spells and headaches more painful than I had ever experienced before. I went to several doctors who ran some tests. Based on the results of these tests, I was diagnosed with CML, chronic myelogenous leukemia. They told me that there was a drug that could manage the cancer in its early stages. However, eventually many patients require a bone marrow transplant. Over the next several months, the drug seemed to be effective. Unfortunately, in July of 2017, my condition worsened. The doctor said that my most effective treatment option would be bone marrow transplant, and my best chance for that would be found with immediate family members. All my family members were tested, but none were found to be an exact match. The only available option would be to contact various bone marrow registries. The likelihood of a match, I was told by doctors, in the general population was 1 in 20,000. In addition, the success rate of a bone marrow transplant for someone with CML was only about 80%. After days of contacting different registries, I was thrilled to discover that the Tikva Bone Marrow Registry, that specifically caters to American Jews of Eastern European descent, had a match in their records for me. They told me that they would notify the potential donor and help arrange the transplant. I was shocked, as you could imagine, when the Tikva registry contacted me a couple of weeks later to let me know that the potential donor did not want to participate in the bone marrow transplant. As well, Tikva told me that they are not allowed to share the identity of the potential donors. Because of privacy considerations, it increases the chance of potential donors signing up if they know that their privacy is protected. It was very difficult for me since the odds of finding another one would be very slim. I had at least hoped to be able to contact the donor and try to convince them to participate. I then decided to explore my legal options. I wanted to see if there was a way to compel the donor to go through with the transplant. However, American civil law does not recognize any individual obligation of a citizen to save a life in danger. There is no legal way to compel the donation. At this point, I looked at alternative treatments, which included chemotherapy, and I began to be worried when my doctors told me that the level of my cancer had gotten to the point where, without a bone marrow transplant, I had very little chance of surviving within a matter of months. The rabbi that was counseling me suggested that I ask and take my case to a Beit. He added that the donor may feel obligated to participate if the transplant was determined to be halachically obligated to do so by the Beit Din. I bring, therefore, this case to your attention. The Beit Din, who was able to contact the donor through the registry. And I'm grateful that the donor agreed to abide by the rules and the ruling of the Beit Din. Please understand that this transplant is my last chance to live. I want to read now the statement by the defendant, the possible donor of the bone marrow transplant, who we'll call Michael. When I, Michael, a 45-year-old male lawyer who lives in Seattle, Washington, was first contacted by Tikva that my bone marrow was a match, I was happy to volunteer. When I spoke with my doctor, he warned me that due to a recent diagnosis of blood clotting deficiency, that the transplant could actually be risky. In general, when the doctor is healthy, there is little risk for this kind of transplant. However, there was now a small chance, 8%, that I could die as a result of my blood clotting deficiency. I decided to get a second opinion from another doctor who said that the risk was minimal. Regardless of this second opinion, the prognosis of the first doctor weighed heavily on me. I ultimately concluded that the risk was too great. I earned the majority of the income for my family. If God forbid anything were to happen to me, there would be no one to financially support my wife and my 3 young children. Additionally, in order for me to participate in this bone marrow transplant, I would need to take a couple of weeks off from work. It would require me to fly to Florida for the procedure, stay there while I recovered, and then fly back to Seattle. In doing so, I would as well incur a substantial financial loss in the amount of at least several $1,000s. Lastly, recovering from the procedure can be painful, and I have circumstances. And two, if Michael is indeed obligated, whether or not Michael should receive any financial compensation from Judy for any financial losses incurred. I look forward to hearing our students.
Madam I'd like now to invite Mora Shuman again. We'll just go briefly on what the judges will be doing today, and we'll then call the first group.
Thank you, Mr. David Azrad. I would like to extend my thanks especially to David Wallach, who helped me a lot in conducting these orals, and also to Aaron Lehrer, who helped a lot in the administration of this event. I'm standing here shivering and trembling the bad news that happened to a school in Florida. As you all know, 17 high school kids were shot to death by someone who had a gun and had a mental problem. I feel that we should stand 1 minute to meditate about what happened there. Please rise. Thank you. We are dealing here with halakha of 2,000 years, where there was no technology, there were no automated machines, and medicine was much less known in those days. However, our rabbis discussed different matters in the law and discussed it in the Gemara and came out with halakha by Mishneh Torah Rambam and Shulchan Aruch by Rabbi Yosef Karo. These are the two books of halakha that we have to obey today. Honorable judges, dear friends, dear participants, you worked very hard, and we will hear your presentation today as lawyers that are dealing with a medical procedure, with a medical problem. So lawyers are not only dealing with the law per se, they are dealing in a broad, different subjects. Amongst them is the medicine. So this case is about a medical problem. The way that the judges will judge you is 4 points for each part of what I'm reading now. Knowledge and understanding of the topic, up to 4 points. Use of sources and examples, up to 4 points. Organization and clarity, also up to 4 points. This is about the content, the style, quality of the presentation itself, and originality and creativity. For the quality, 4 points, and originality and creativity, 4 points. Altogether, there are 20 points. 20 points are also given to the factum, to the brief, to the written work that the participations wrote. The factums were given to the judges ahead of time, with or without an addendum, depends on the groups. And now I will call, not in order of importance, just I will call the first group to present their factum, their oral. Olivia Ben-Ami, Deborah Castile, Lara Kessner, Tiffany Miller, please come down.
Hello, my name is Olivia Benami.
I'm Deborah Castillo.
I'm Lara Kastner.
And I'm Tiffany Miller.
You shall not stand by while your fellow's blood is shed. Quoting from Beit, 1916. You are not abiding by this prohibition when you have the power to save another and you choose not to. When another's life is in your hands, if you decide not to save them, it is as if you yourself are killing them. When it is possible for someone to save a life, if they neglect to do so, they are guilty of failing to uphold this commandment. However, another statement in the Torah is contradictory to this information. It is not compulsory to save someone's life if doing so endangers another's life or limb. Let our brother live alongside you, quoting from Beit 25:36, implies that your own life comes before another. Saving a single life is counted as if the entire world has been saved, quoting from Mishnah 4:5, since life is greatly valued in God's eyes. So, does that influence the actions of the Savior? Talmud Yerushalmi concludes that one is obligated to enter a situation that may or may not be life-threatening to save someone from certain death. Keeping all of this in mind, how can these commandments influence the case of the defendant Michael and the claim Mrs. Judy Rosen? Is it really the choice of the defendant to participate in the bone marrow transplant?
Is Michael obligated by the halakha? If it proves possible to give your bone marrow to someone to save their life and contribute to their well-being at little risk to yourself, could there be any doubt that this is worthwhile? There is a very important principle in the Jewish law, known as pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh is the mitzvah of trying to save another person's life if possible. This is considered very important in our tradition, which allows the violation of any and all other commandments, even very important ones, for example, observing Shabbat and keeping kosher. Pikuach nefesh was originally referred to as the act of removing rocks that have fallen on top of another person. If you are allowed to remove rocks on Shabbat in order to save another person's life, shouldn't you be allowed to undergo a bone marrow transplant? Assuming that contributing your bone marrow is saving a life and there is no risk factors that would prevent you from doing so, it is a highly worthy act to perform. However, we must consider the possibility that Michael dies during the transplant process. According to the Jewish law, the body should not be buried soon after death. It is a violation of the Jewish law, nivul hamet, discretion of the dead, to tamper with a body by removing an organ. Albeit, if that violation is done to save another's life or restore that person's health, then it is allowed. If, say, a person's heart, lungs, kidney, or liver can continue to live in the other person's body, then they should not be buried with the dead body. Yes, if a certain person's body part is transplanted, it will not be buried with the person it was originally found in. However, it will become part of a different person. It is clear what an act of chesed this is.
For example, one person sees another drowning in the sea or being attacked by bandits or by wild animals, and although able to rescue him either alone or by hiring others, he does not rescue the other. One hears a non-Jew or informers plotting evil against another or laying a trap for him, and he does not call it to the other's attention and let him know. One knows that a non-Jew or a violent person is going to attack another, and although able to appease him on behalf of the other and make him change his mind, he does not do so. All of these cases, or any similar ones, transgress the prohibition, you shall not stand by while your fellow's blood is shed. Shulchan Aruch, Lashon Mishpat, 426:1.
Where do we know that one must save his fellow from the loss of himself? From the verse, Devarim 22:2, you shall restore it to him. This verse tells us that if you see a stray sheep, you will take it back to your house, and the man the animal belongs to must find you, so that you can restore it to him. From this, you see that one is not obligated to take trouble of hiring men if he cannot save the endangered person himself. Talmud Bavli, Sanhedrin 73a. When a fellow is dying, you must take action. Michael must act similarly and restore Judy by donating his bone marrow so she will not die. He must try to save the person at risk even if it imperils his own life. Another factor not to ignore is that the donors between the ages of 18 to 44 provide the greatest chance for transplant success. Age guidelines are not meant to discriminate. They are meant to protect the safety of the donor and provide the greatest outcome for the patient. Knowing this, we must remember that Michael is a 45-year-old man. The success of a transplant in general cannot be guaranteed, but with a donor being over 44 years old, the chances become more unfavorable. With this in mind, Michael is still obligated by the Jewish law to donate his bone marrow.
Financial compensation issue. What is the Jewish view on financial compensation? We cannot make money from a bone marrow transplant. Lack of donors has led some patients to having a higher chance of dying. If a payment or reward is given to the donor, both the donor and the recipient can be treated equally. If Michael does indeed donate his bone marrow, he will need time to recover, and that results in a loss of time at work, and thus he does not make money in that time. Michael still needs to provide for his family, so he needs the money that he misses at work. Pay would increase the availability of organs and would open up opportunities for people with fewer options. Yes, there are worries about exploitations. However, those worries are poorly articulated. The worry is typically that poor people, people with few choices, will feel the need to sell their organs. It is not clear why giving the new option, one that are free to turn down, could gain them enough money to start their own company or to buy a house is hurting them. Michael should not be financially compensated, since donating his bone marrow would be considered a mitzvah, and when you give, you shouldn't expect to get anything in return.
What if the doctors have two different opinions? Which do you listen to? Based on the information given, you must always listen to the opinion with a higher risk. Michael does not want to give his bone marrow if there's a high possibility of his death, which is given by the opinion of one of the two doctors. When the results are uncertain, you must take into account every single possible outcome, especially the ones where the risks are greater. If Judy does not get a bone marrow transplant, she has a 100% chance of dying. If Michael donates his bone marrow, there's a risk that he only has 2% or 8% chance of dying, according to the two different doctors' perspective. For example, if one risk was ignored because it seemed less credible, or if the chance that it could happen was set aside, how would you feel if the risk came to be true and you could have prevented it? According to the Jewish law, you must also save a life if you see they need it. You shall stand by while your fellow blood is shed. Vaikra 19:16. All it takes is a moment to consider whether the latter applies to the situation, or let our brothers live alongside you. Vaikra 25:36. It is written in the Hagahot Maimoniyat that in the Yerushalmi, it concludes that one is obligated to enter into an uncertain, life-threatening danger risk in order to save another. It appears that the reason for this is because the victim will definitely die, while it's unknown if the rescuer will. Ben Yosef Hoshen, Mishpat 426.
Mrs. Judy Rosen was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia, a bone marrow transplant being the only possible way of her staying alive. Michael was the only person who could donate bone marrow to Judy and save her. By law, Michael was not obligated to donate the bone marrow, and he decided to put his own life first and not donate his bone marrow. This is why Judy turned to the Jewish law, looking to see if Michael would, in fact, be obligated to donate his bone marrow. As a result, it was determined that Judy's life will not be cut short if the bone marrow transplant that Michael is obligated to undergo by the Jewish law is successful. Thank you.
Thank you.
People should actually be paid for organ donation, and maybe this will encourage more people to give. I mean, poor people, you say, won't be exploited. This is not really a developed argument. I'd like you to explain that more, please.
Well, it said in the sources that there wasn't many people who were available to give a bone marrow transplant. And for other organs, there's some people that are not willing to donate their things because they're either afraid of medical issues or maybe medical bills or just losing time at work. But if people were offered money to donate their organs, maybe there'd be more people who are willing to be in that situation other than not getting paid, not wanting to do it.
And as far as halakha, can you think of any examples when this would be encouraged or maybe frowned upon?
Was this at the beginning?
I'm looking at page 7 of the document.
Well, what I think an example would be, let's say, it might be frowned upon. If you're poor and then like you don't have a home, let's say, and you require a lot of money, you might feel like you have, like your only option is to sell your organs. So even if you don't want to, you will, so that either you can support your family or yourself.
Do you think that would, in fact, encourage a secondary market, a black market for organs, or do you think that the fact that we have a regulated system of organ donation would be more in line with the teachings that you've read here in this project?
Well, not necessarily a black
doctors make sure that that's what it's going for. They're going to give you back what you lost for that in the time you're recovering.
So the way I understand you mean by that, the person is not being paid for the organ or the marrow, they're being paid for their financial losses from having done it, i.e. expenses.
Does that include loss of time? And because you make a distinction with regards to, in order to just follow up on the question, you make a distinction between loss of revenue, where Michael is losing 2 weeks of salary, let's call it that, as opposed to out-of-pocket expenses where he's expending money to travel, for his plane tickets, etc. Do you make a distinction in your argumentation with regards to positive loss, where he has to actually spend money, as opposed to the negative loss where he's not earning money?
No, he doesn't have to spend money to get the transplant.
So his flight should be reimbursed,
Yeah, that's a part of the compensation.
I have a question. I noticed you said that Michael is 45 and that the ideal donor is between 18 and 24.
Yeah.
Why are you advocating that Michael still needs to put his own life in risk if there's a faith, there's a doubt that he's even a donor who could save Judy's life?
Well, like, as we said, that it cannot be guaranteed, but it doesn't mean that it 100% won't work. So Judy, it's her only option, and so Michael, like as we said before, that one of the examples were that like if you put yourself into an uncertain life-threatening danger to save someone who's in life-threatening, 100% she will die. So we think that he's only a year over the 18 to 44 limit.
So that difference is not big enough to say he shouldn't at least try this.
It's not saying that it's not saying that it won't work. It's just saying it's less of a chance.
There's not only a risk, there's a risk even if you're in between those ages, 18 to 44, there's still a risk. But even though he's a year, there might be still a risk for him, even though he's a year older, but it's the only way for her to live, for Judy to live. So if he donates, the highest chance is 8%. So it's not sure that he will die, but it's for sure, without the transplant, she will 100% sure die. But if he donates it, then he saves her life.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Introduce yourself again, and then we will start.
We introduce ourselves and try to.
All right. So, okay.
Hello, honorable judges. I am Rabbi Adam Akayim.
I am Rabbi Joshua Azandea.
I'm Halacha Advisor Nadia Bacassis.
Rabbi Bernal here. And I'm Rabbi Ron Peru.
We are all proud representatives of the Moot Beit.
So, have any of you guys read our new case?
Of course. What a dilemma.
I haven't really heard what happened. Any of you care to explain?
Well, basically, a 32-year-old teacher, Miss Judy Rosen, was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia, or better known as CML. Doctors told her that a bone marrow transplant would be necessary for her survival. She was pleased to hear that the Tikva Bone Registry had a match in their records for her. She was quite surprised to hear that her potential donor, Michael, declined to participate in the transplant.
However, it says here, Michael has agreed to be subject to a Beit Din and will concede to our decision. We, the Beit Din, must decide whether or not Michael is halachically obligated to go through with the medical procedure.
Also, if Michael is indeed obligated, whether or not he should be financially compensated for it.
Well, let's start by saying this. It is said that you cannot stand by and watch someone bleed out. According to Vaikra 1916, you are required to help save those in need. Here we see a good example of how Michael could help save Judy. He could help her by donating bone marrow and possibly save her life. This is backed up by Article 14 of the laws of murder and preserving life and the Rambam commentary. They indicate that if somebody has the opportunity to prevent a death and they choose not to, they are at fault. The Halacha states that you cannot cause someone to die by your inactions.
Good point. However, what are the views of the Yerushalmi on such a law?
Well, according to the Yerushalmi, one must risk his life and enter uncertain, life-threatening danger in order to save another. However, if the rescuer's danger proves to be a certain life-threatening risk, then he is not obligated to save that person at the expense of his own life. That is not the case in our situation. Michael has to help Judy, since he can and has the means to do so with minimal risk. Accordingly, the Beit Yosef Hoshem Mishpat 426 repeats the same principle and states that a person must risk their life in order to save someone else from certain death.
Good point. I completely agree. What do you think, Rabbi Hazemea?
I couldn't agree more. Let's settle this case. I'm tired.
Guys, let's consider some of the facts before we leap to any conclusions.
As a matter of fact, that was exactly what I was thinking. The Hagahot Maimoniot on the Mishneh Torah, Laws of the Murder and Preserving Life 114, states that a person who saves a fellow Jew is considered as if he saved an entire world. This goes for say that if you leave a Jew to die or kill a Jew, it is as if you're destroying an entire world. The obvious choice for Michael would be to save Judy.
What about the percentages? What is the acceptable risk? How do these weightings affect our overall obligation?
Well, according to interpretation done by Rabbi Eliezer of Beit Yosef on Choshen Mishpat 426, it is not necessary to save the life of another person if by endangering your life, if the chances of both the rescuer and the victim, chance of dying is 50% or more, which goes to say that if the chance of dying is 50% or more, you don't need to help.
Wait a second. So therefore, according to the source, what is the acceptable risk amount to be able to enter life-threatening dangers?
It must be less than 50%. In our case, Michael's chance of death is a minimal at around 8%, while Judy's probability of death is at a 20%. These values are well under 50%, which means that Michael should go through with the procedure.
So even if Michael has a chance of dying, he's still obligated to go through with the procedure?
Yes, that's inaccurate. Not be selfish and overprotective of his or her own life. However, the Mishnah Berurah indicates that there is no point in trying to save someone if your fate will be the same, implying that they will both die.
Fair point well made as ever, Rabbi Adam. 426, it explains that one is obligated to risk his or her own life in order to save another. These sources are clearly backing up our train of thought.
I agree as well, Rabbi Joshua.
Also, Beit Torah explains that surviving at the expense of someone else is worse than both of them dying. If Michael helps, then he has a chance of perishing, but Judy will survive. If he does nothing, Judy will surely die. His death isn't as likely as Judy's, which is why he should certainly help.
Well, as Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, I'd rather kill or be killed. I'll go and save him with all my strength. He's saying that in order to save someone that's in danger, you must do everything in your power to save them. You either do everything, and even go as far as killing, or you do nothing, and as Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says it, you end up getting killed. In regards to our case, this means that Michael should help Judy. It says that you should do everything to save someone's life. Therefore, even if his life is at risk, you should sacrifice everything to save Judy's life.
But do you really think her life is worth risking over a fellow Jew?
Well, Rabbi Akiva comments on Vayikra 19:18, love your neighbor as you love yourself, which basically translates to treating your friend as you like to be treated. This can be applied to our case. Michael should do whatever it takes to help Judy get better. If he was the one in a dangerous situation, he would do whatever it takes to survive. He would love to have someone donate bone marrow. So, shouldn't he therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, do everything to save Judy's life?
Without a doubt. Nadia, do you have anything?
Yes, according to the Shulchan Aruch, you must do whatever it takes to save a friend. It says the obligation for a man to save his friend in body, money, or the like. In this case, Michael needs to help Judy by giving her his bone marrow and receive compensation.
I completely agree with you in the question of Michael receiving compensation for his help. A passage in Sefer Miriam states that you are obligated to save someone who is in danger. Equally, the rescuer must take on any financial responsibility to save the person who is in danger. If the person who is in danger has money, he or she must give monetary compensation to the rescuer. Therefore, Judy should be obligated to pay Michael for his efforts. Furthermore, Rabbi Akiva continues by saying, you must fulfill your financial obligations even if you have to sell the hair upon your head to do so. This means that Judy should do anything to be able to pay Michael back.
So, isn't it obvious that Michael should be obligated to go through with the transplant?
Of course.
Yes, but as much as that is true, he should still be compensated financially.
Wow, what a great and productive day I think we've made in.
Agreed. Thank you very much, Chris.
My name is Sarah Michelle.
My name is Lev Kalin.
And I'm Julia Langmaven.
And
My name is Judy Rosen. I am a 32-year-old public school teacher. I was recently diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia. I am currently in need of a bone marrow transplant. Luckily, I found the Tikva Bone Marrow Registry.
I'm the representative of Michael, whose real name will not be stated for confidentiality reasons. My client refused to go through with Judy's bone marrow transplant when he found out that he had a blood clotting disorder, endangering his life. Michael has now agreed to follow whatever the Beit deems necessary.
I'm very happy you brought this case to the Beit Din. This complex situation must be analyzed in several ways. The risk of pain, the risk of death, and finally the risk of financial loss.
In regards to the requirement to save a life, how is it that it falls on Michael's shoulders to save Judy's life?
The Mishnah Sanhedrin 4:5 claims that for all who destroy one life from Israel, it is as if they have destroyed an entire world. Whereas all who save one life from Israel, it is as if they have saved an entire world.
Vayikra 19:16 states the following: You shall not stand by while your fellow's blood is shed. It is essentially forbidden for a Jew to ignore someone else's danger. The Talmud Bavli backs this claim.
The sources you cite seem to imply a requirement to save someone from immediate physical danger. Judy is tragically threatened by a debilitating sickness, not by something immediately dangerous.
The Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah Nidarim 4:4 says that the commandment to restore to him extends to the restoration of health to a sick person. In reference, Maimonides viewed the lost health of someone as equivalent to material possession to be found by a physician.
So in this case, Michael has essentially found the means to help my condition through his matching bone marrow and is commanded by the laws of lost property to return it, since he possesses something that will help me live.
We mustn't forget that my client is going to be undertaking genuine risk to donate his bone marrow, potentially making his requirement to save a life too dangerous. What is his exact risk in this case?
The Shulchan Aruch Chaim explains what happens in the case of two conflicting medical opinions, as we are meant to lean on the safe side when it comes to the risk of someone's life. We will treat Michael's risk as an 8% chance of death.
In that case, can my client seriously be expected to risk his own life for the sake of someone he doesn't even know? In the Talmud Bavli, it's proven that given the choice between someone else's life and your own, you should always choose your own.
That case talks about a choice between two different certain deaths. Michael's choice is between an uncertain death and a certain death. My certain death and your minor risk of death.
Unless that's a threat, I have no risk of death. My client does. But even risking your own life to intervene in someone else's certain death isn't required. According to the Shulchan Aruch Harav, Orach Chaim 329.8, you're not required to save someone if there is danger involved. That idea can be found in the Radbaz's third responsa as well.
That's debatable. There are cases where people have been commanded to risk their own lives to save others. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik did so during a cholera outbreak. Not only that, but in the most well-known example of not standing by, there is a clear danger. How would it be possible to save someone from wild animals or drowning without a small risk to the rescuer?
Just for a bit of context, one study found researchers of drowning people had a 13% mortality rate.
That's a really random fact, but okay.
I tripped myself up with it when Principal Steinmetz assigned me the lifeguard for 3B's beach field trip. I suppose that doesn't look too good in hindsight now, does it?
Anyway, picking up on where we left off, someone else who would agree with Judy's side is actually the Red Buzz.
In a later response of his, he updated his ruling, stating that if the risk of death is under 50%, a person is required to come to the rescue, putting you, Michael, directly into that category.
Yeah, still not Michael. Point taken though. This leads us to the risk of pain. According to the Migdal Oz, one does not need to experience pain to save someone else because lashes are worse than death. The medical procedure Michael would be required to undergo clearly involves discomfort and pain.
According to the Magen Avraham, one is required to endure pain so the other is not killed. The requirement to risk your life to save someone from drowning, bandits, or wild animals seems to imply a certain amount of discomfort and potentially even pain in any case, does it not?
Let it be noted that my client is a lawyer and will have an estimate of several $1,000s worth of financial losses. He will have to take time off work and purchase plane tickets.
The Beit recognizes these major expenses. However, this does not excuse Michael from donating the bone marrow. Talmud Bavli from the verse Devarim 22:2 and Sefer Meirot Einayim Koshen Mishpat all imply that Michael is obliged to pay in order to save a life.
According to the Shulchan Aruch, Yoreh De'ah, a person rescued from captivity is obligated to repay the expenses of the person who rescued him. My client donating his bone marrow is comparable to saving Judy from a hostage situation. Therefore, she should be responsible for repaying all of Michael's expenses. Sanhedrin 74a backs this claim.
Very well. Although depending on the bone marrow registry's policy, some of Michael's expenses will be paid, but I can provide the rest of the losses he endures.
With this, I believe the Beit Din has reached its verdict. Based on the sources presented, Michael is halakhically obligated to donate his bone marrow in order to save Judy's life.
As for the financial loss that Michael endures, Judy will be responsible to pay for all of Michael's expenses, unless the bone marrow registry pays for some of it.
The Beit Din wishes both Judy and Michael a safe recovery.
Came up well in the oral presentation, so I'm going to leave it for a moment. I have one or two possible questions.
I'm curious about your use of Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik.
Yes.
A very revered rabbi. Do you think that can you use that as part of a halachic argument? Can you use an anecdote as part of a halachic argument? And do you think that we, mere plebeians, can aspire to the greatness of someone like Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik and walk into a cholera outbreak to help people? Wouldn't that make someone feel less likely to help because they would think, well, he's so great and I'm just not on that level? How do we relate to the stories of tzaddikim when trying to make an ethical halachic decision?
Well, it's mentioned that when Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik held during the cholera outbreak, it was to help out everyone, Jewish or not, because Kol Yisrael Arvim Zel Hazeh, also to help out everyone. Like, it doesn't depend on who they are, just to help out other people. Because what we could take away from this is when you go into any situation, let's say hypothetically Michael wasn't Jewish or something, and we can still look at it is that even if the great Jewish rabbi helped someone else who wasn't Jewish, we should take away that no matter on what the condition is or where their background is, we should always help other people in these situations.
Actually, if you all turn to page 8 of the factum, please. We just wanted to elaborate on something we wrote. Based on this, we noticed that based on the belief of the danger of infection, it was insignificant compared to this certain death awaiting the people that were already infected, and those people really needed help. Whereas it wasn't exactly certain that people would necessarily be infected by helping.
So Reb Chaim's risk was akin to Michael's 8% risk. It was just low. You're saying it was an insignificant risk of infection.
Yes, it was low.
I'm also at page 8 of your fact, and at the end of that paragraph, we say the issue becomes the degree of risk of which a person should risk to save the life of another. And further down in that paragraph that follows, you wrote, Radbaz has already established that Jewish law cannot force someone to undertake that risk. However, in a later responsa, the Radbaz revises that ruling. Is it actually a revision, or is it more a precision? A revision, in my mind, overrules his previous statement, whereas a precision would come to delineate it more. And I'd like you to tie that to the degree, because that's how you end your prior paragraph and bring it into this new paragraph where you say the degree of risk of which a person should save a life of another.
You repeat that.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. It was long.
Yeah.
I apologize. So my question is succinctly as follows. A, does Radbaz actually revise his decision, or does he particularize it? That's the first part of my question. The second part of the question is, at which point, at which degree, does a person have to risk his life? So if I'm at 8% and we say yes, if I say 20%, 50%, where am I?
Well, one of the facts, one of the sources that we actually looked at, it mentions that one should not be overprotective with their life, and if the risk in the situation is under 50%, then they should go ahead and go on with the operation, because there's two things that we know. We know that Michael's risk is 8% or under. We know that Judy in this case is at 100. So since the risk would be under 50%, we think that he should.
It's not clear from the fact or from the presentation, from the case itself actually, whether Michael's risk of 8% is a global risk, or is that the risk of someone who has a blood clotting deficiency. So that's one thing that needs to be considered. Second question, one of the sources tells us that in case of danger, one is required to engage, to hire assistance to help save a person's life. No reference there to being compensated for saving. Why does the source that says that the person should be compensated take precedence over someone being required to do it without compensation?
Well, as we mentioned in our script, which I'll pull up for you.
We actually based our decision on the most basic source of it all, like the raw basic source, Vayikra 19:16, which forbids a Jew to ignore someone else's danger without taking into consideration any circumstance or anything like that. So therefore, Michael would be obliged to risk his life.
It also mentions that if someone rescues you, you should also be able to account for their fees for that, to repay them.
On what basis?
So like we mentioned in our presentation, we said there was two financial aspects that we were looking at. Since he's a lawyer, and if he takes time off work, he can lose off of his salary because he's not present, and also he has to purchase plane tickets from Seattle to Florida. So she has to repay him for that.
So where does that come into halacha? What halachic premise is the source of requiring to pay someone? Is there a text that supports that?
According to Shulchan Aruch Yeridea 252:12, we compare Judy's situation to that of a hostage situation in which Judy is required to compensate Michael for saving her life.
One source. Okay, good.
I was interested in your use of the analogy to Hashavat Aveda, returning something that somebody lost.
Yeah.
So Judy lost her health, and Michael has to find it for her. What do you think are the limits of that analogy? Is it really the same as someone who maybe carelessly dropped something? It's not her fault that she was stricken with cancer. Where do you see that analogy hold up, and where do you see it maybe break down?
Or is it Michael's fault?
Right, Michael kind of accidentally found her.
Right.
Did he? Yeah.
This is
So
the last question.
actually, as we mentioned before, Maimonides, in reference, he viewed the loss of health of somebody as equivalent to a material possession to be found by a physician. So that's one thing that we noted when we took into account this argument.
And why is that a good? Do you think, in your opinion, is that a good analogy, or what are the limits of that? Where is that not a good analogy?
Well, comparing someone to property is not exactly a good analogy, but in this case, it does require that Michael saved Judy, and it saves her life. So it's a good analogy in this case.
It's just another argument.
This is my colleague Gabriella Bright, a council member here at the Beit de Moot.
This is a very complex case.
Ne vous inquiétez pas. With Dr. Banzer and Rabbi Boudana, we will be out of here in no time.
Commençons. We don't have time. I just got off the phone with Mr. Goldstein. He asked me to officiate his daughter's wedding tonight.
A wedding? I have to go do open heart surgery right now. Anyways, let's get to it. Michael came to me seeking medical information about what he should do regarding the procedure. Unfortunately, I had to inform him that if he were to go through with the procedure, he would have an 8% chance of dying.
But you are not the only doctor that this man went to visit. Does one doctor's opinion outweigh another?
It is completely normal for Michael to feel conflicted. Which doctor should he listen to?
We see in the Shulchan Aruch, we must listen to the doctor that has the higher expertise in dealing with two different opinions. Given that the experience of the doctors was not specified, Michael must treat both of their opinions equally, which will probably make it harder for him to decide. Dr. Benzer, you're here with us now. Why don't you give us your advice?
I know that even when the donor is completely healthy, the donor is still at risk of experiencing some of the severe side effects a bone marrow transplant can cause, such as organ damage, stem cell failure, infertility, and infections.
Whoa, those seem like some intense side effects.
Yeah, and that's when the patient is completely healthy.
But Dr. Benzer, the patient is not 100% healthy. Michael has been recently diagnosed with a blood clot deficiency.
Exactement. That is why we must put emphasis on the reality that Michael is at extreme risk of developing one of the severe side effects a bone marrow transplant can cause. To add to that, the likelihood of a blood clot forming in Michael's body is certainly greater than 8%. Both doctors determined that there is a risk of undergoing the bone marrow transplant. Despite the fact that 8% may seem low to an everyday person, it is medically significant.
It looks like Dr. Benzer has determined that going through with this would be harmful to the body. Let us look at the situation from a halachic point of view. Rabbi Buadana, what is your opinion at first glance?
First off, Rabbi David ben Solomon Ibn Avizimra, also known as Adbaz, was a huge scholar. In the many responses he's written, he indicates that uncertain danger takes precedence over fellow certain danger. From this, we can understand that one is not obliged to save someone's life if he is putting himself in potential danger.
That sounds exactly like Michael's situation. He has an 8% chance of dying in order to save Judy's life, but he might be the only one.
You got it. In other words, he would be putting himself in uncertain danger. Therefore, we can come to a conclusion that Michael is not obliged to undergo an operation in order to save someone's life, because as mentioned previously, questionable danger takes precedence over fellow certain danger.
Hold on a second. Rabbi Akiva teaches us that an individual's life takes precedence over a fellow's life. Vayikra 25:36 stipulates that your brother shall live with you but shall not die with you. In our case, Michael will be facing an 8% risk of dying. Consequently, his life takes precedence over his fellows.
We believe that Michael would be entering a situation that involves possible life-threatening danger. In the Mishnah, this is referred to as Safek Sakana. The Mishnah Berura Orach Chaim explains, if there is life-threatening danger to the rescuer, one is not obligated to endanger his life because the rescuer's life takes precedence over the life of a fellow Jew. Even if there is uncertain life-threatening danger, the rescuer's uncertain risk takes precedence over the certain danger of the one at risk.
Wow, the fact that the passage puts so much emphasis on life-threatening danger shows that it must be a deciding factor on whether or not one is obligated to help his fellow, correct?
Absolutely. In this case, Michael would be heading into potential life-threatening risk, and clearly, this man has every right not to feel obligated to help this woman. Furthermore, going through with the operation would be nothing other than a great act of kindness, or a mitzvah. In his comments to that passage, Menachem Meiri explicitly writes that this mitzvah does not obligate risking one's own life in an attempt to save one's neighbor.
Not to mention, if Michael were to go through with the operation, not only would we have to consider that he would be entering a situation that could potentially lead to death, but we must also consider the severe repercussions he would endure after the operation. Recall that the side effects of a bone marrow transplant include stem cell failure, organ damage, infections, and infertility.
Keeping that in mind, the fact that he would be suffering after the operation can be applied to a specific section found in Migdal Oz, Even Boshan 183. This segment mentions, one does not need to endure difficult suffering and bitterness in order to save someone's life, because lashes are worse than death.
Michael can certainly relate to this passage. The recovery would be extensive and painful. I think we could all agree that one should be able to choose whether or not to put themselves in danger to save someone else.
100%! Wait a minute. What if for the slight chance Michael does decide to fulfill this mitzvah? Does Miss Judy Rosen need to compensate this young gentleman?
Even though we recognize that Michael is exempt from undergoing an operation, in the slight chance that he does fulfill the mitzvah, Miss Judy Rosen would have to compensate him. This is because he is the sole breadwinner of his household, and he must provide for his family while in recovery.
Let us consider Judaic sources that brought us to this conclusion. The Shulchan Aruch is extremely strict when it comes to compensation in Michael's situation. The one who was redeemed must immediately compensate the rescuer. If the rescuer has not been compensated, he can take the one who was redeemed to court. Without this, one would not redeem their fellow. This states that in the occasion where Judy does not pay back the losses Michael will endure, he is halachically allowed to sue her.
I read something about that. It said the one who is saved is obligated to compensate the rescuer because no one is obliged to save someone else with one's own money. In light of these sources, we can conclude that Judy would be obliged to compensate Michael if he does decide to go through with the surgery. The fact of the matter is, he is damaging himself in order to save the life of a fellow Jew, and the survivor is liable to pay for all damages the rescue incurs.
We, the Beit Din, conclude the following. Firstly, Michael does not need to undergo the operation as it is solely a mitzvah and not an obligation. Secondly, if Michael decides to accomplish this mitzvah, Ms. Judy Rosen will need to compensate him, especially being that he is the only source of income for his family. We wish Judy a speedy recovery and hope that everyone can continue to live long and prosperous lives.
Amazingly said, Leia. We recognize that Judy is going through hardship right now, but unfortunately, we have to look at the bigger picture. The situation would not only affect Michael, but his entire family. Shalom and Todah.
A couple of things. Unless I'm not a doctor anymore than any of you guys are yet, and I never will be, and some of you may become. So, but my understanding of a blood clot deficiency means that your blood doesn't clot, rather than it forms clots that you would that could be life damaging. So blood clot deficiency means you can't clot your blood. Your blood would run out. That's just a. If there's a doctor in the house, am I correct?
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, in this case. So that argumentation goes the opposite way than you were using it. But nonetheless, a blood clot deficiency could be a source of danger. My question really is, given your argument about pain, when would it ever be required, if ever, would it ever be required for someone to provide an organ, say a kidney, when you can live with only one, or to provide any type of surgery that would result in the pain of the donor? Would anyone ever be required? And if not, why would anyone ever be expected to put their life in danger and at risk of pain? What would motivate someone to do that halachically?
Well, I believe that no one would ever be obligated to undergo something that could potentially hurt them in the halakha, because the Torah and everything about Judaism is a lot about preserving oneself and preserving the body. The body is the holiest thing that God has ever created. No one would ever be obligated to undergo something that could potentially risk them in any way. But
you're suggesting that every time, every one of these situations, every transplant situation potentially puts the donor at risk.
Of course.
Okay.
You can require someone to do it.
You can
require someone.
Okay.
I'm curious about your use of the story of Esther at the beginning of your written presentation. It's great. It's Purim season, so it's a very nice connection. But Esther did the opposite. Esther actually did decide to risk her life, put her own life in danger to save the Jewish people. Why is this different? Or did Esther make a decision that was just over the top heroic? Is it something that we should be aspiring to?
Of course, everyone should aspire to help out their fellow Jew, but we never said that Esther was obligated to go. Esther was living an amazing life. She was the queen. She had everything. She had gold and money. She was safe. But she decided that for her, the whole Jewish people was more important. No one ever told her, you have to go and you have to tell them that you're a Jewish person, or else it's your fault that everyone else dies. No one ever said that.
So Michael signed up on the tip of the street voluntarily. Nobody came to him and said, you have to do this. And they have a rigorous process where they look at potential donors, and they're going to reject people who have absolute contraindications. You know, you have cancer, you've got multiple sclerosis, you can't give. He didn't have anything like this. Sure, he had something else. So what makes his condition so definitive that he can't give? There is some risk, but you use the word extreme risk. What makes you come to that conclusion?
We'd like a minute to discuss, please.
Go for page 6 of your
Perfect, thank you. So, if you were to, well, 8% is equivalent to 1 in every 12 and a half. So 2 out of 25, let's call it. So, if you were to walk into a classroom upstairs with 24 students in it, and I told you if you were to walk into the class, 2 of the students in this class would fall off their chair. It's not a big deal. They fall off their chair, they hurt themselves, whatever. It's not the end of the world. Now, if I told you, out of these 24 kids, and you were included, so 25, out of these 25 people, 2 of you guys would die. It changes everything completely, because when you're dealing with something that's life and death, you don't know if you want to put your life at risk. So if I asked you the question, there's 24 kids in a class, and if you knew you would walk in and yourself would die, would you ever set foot in the class if I paid you $1 million, let's say? Would you risk your life for this life or death opportunity?
That premise is not exact, because we're talking about a sample size of 25, whereas sample size with regards to an 8% risk is much larger. Now, I understand that the math boils down to 2 out of 25. However, the sample size on an 8% is out of millions of donors. So, and we don't know, like Rabbi stated, we don't know what those complications stem from. So, the question I believe that's being posed is, so fine, you consider 8% an extreme risk. What about 6%? What about 4? What about 2? Or is it an absolute 0? So that's the question that I'm trying to get to.
I think that we're not saying that the 8% is an extreme risk. We're saying that because of his recent diagnosis with blood clot deficiency, he is at extreme risk of getting one of these side effects. We're not saying that he's at extreme risk of dying, because that 8% chance of dying. We're saying he's at extreme risk of going through and getting those side effects, and the chances of him getting a blood clot is way higher than 8%, considering he does have a blood clot deficiency. So yes, the 8%, but the 8% isn't a global 8% of risk. The 8% is a specific 8% of dying. You have to take into account the other risks that are way higher than 8% that he can get because of this.
But the blood clot deficiency does not increase his risk of infection, et cetera, the 4 factors that Dr. Ventura getting you through medical school right away. You know, don't wait for your acceptance letter. It's come from me. The risk for Michael, the greater risk for Michael is that he bleeds out, right? And when they remove, and I'm not sure that would happen with bone marrow, taking bone marrow. But I certainly, the highest risk for him would be that he would bleed out rather than clot. That would be the exact opposite of what clotting deficiency would be about. Thank you.
Last question.
So my question is something that nobody's touched on in any of the drafts. Where do you put the 20% failure rate? So how do you factor that in? If, let's say, we have a 20% failure rate of Susan, I'm sorry, of Judy's, excuse me, I apologize.
Thank you.
Of Judy's success rate, there's a 20% failure rate. What if the failure rate was 50%? What if the failure rate was 60%? Does that change your outlook on your decision making?
No, because the question doesn't have anything to do with Judy. It has to do with if Michael is halachically obligated. The 20% chance is just on top of a reason why he shouldn't do it. Let's say he does it, he's part of the 8%, he passes away. She's part of the 20%, she passes away. What happens to
his family and whoever is her loved one, then you just killed 2 Jews that were perfectly good people. The percentage of the risk failure didn't help us with our decision at all, because we're not looking at Judy right now. We're looking at Michael and how he would recuperate afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm 32 years old and was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia in October 2016. I desperately need a bone marrow donation. With it, I'd have an 80% chance of survival. Even with the unfavorable chances of finding a suitable donor, being 1 in 20,000, Baruch Hashem, God delivered. However, after luckily finding a proper match, the donor no longer wanted to follow through with the procedure for reasons he did not wish to disclose. As my situation worsened, I took this case to the Beit.
To preserve my anonymity, I go by the alias Michael. I decided not to undergo the surgery because I have a blood clotting deficiency. After consulting 2 doctors, one of their opinions worried me. I might have an 8% risk of dying if I donate my bone marrow. Considering the money I would lose due to travel costs, time off work, and more, as well as the chance of death, I can't do this to my family. However, given the difficult situation, I will accept the Beit Din's ruling.
Shalom. We have Hamon to cover today. Welcome, Dr. Brown. I'm Rav Shalkun. This is Rav Budana, and this is our assistant, Mr. Hotchkiss.
Shalom, uvracha.
Bon appetit. First of all, it's important to note that generally, it is an obligation to save a life in danger. This is the concept of pekuach nefesh. The Gemara bases the decision on 2 biblical verses, a positive and a negative one. You shall restore it to him, and you shall not stand idly by the blood of another. However, there do exist exceptions to this rule.
This brings us to our second subject, whether the discomfort and distress that Michael and his family would undergo due to the surgery should be a reason for him not to go through with it. Several poskim, including Magen Avraham, stipulate that one is required to save another if his only concern is pain or discomfort.
So therefore, the discomfort that they would undergo is not a reason for Michael to donate.
We must now consider the third point, being, is it halachically required for Michael, how halacha views bone marrow donation?
Well, we must first discuss blood donation in order to form a parallel between blood and bone marrow donations. So the question is, must one donate blood to save a fellow Jew?
B'vokasha, we've discussed this last week. Several rabbis and scholars such as Radbas conclude that one is required to donate their blood if it is to save a life, because of its negligible risk.
Although Rabbi Sternbuch states that one is not obligated to give a part of himself to save another, he adds that by virtue of blood's capacity to regenerate, blood donation does not follow this rule.
So bone marrow possesses these same characteristics. In terms of risk, there was a study conducted by the EBMT which determined its risk of death to be 1 in over 27,000. Doctors Adam Grasso and Wael Jabber also agree that low-risk procedures have a cardiac risk lower than 1%. And let's not forget that blood marrow also regenerates.
Therefore, since both blood and bone marrow regenerate and their donations have negligible risk, under ordinary circumstances, the defendant would be halachically required to donate his bone marrow. Rega, this is an extraordinary circumstance, which is why we must consider our fourth subject, how the risk of Michael's blood clotting deficiency might affect the decision. In order to determine how his deficiency might modify the obligation to save a life, we must first determine which medical opinion is valid, 8% risk of mortality or minimal risk, as well as whether the opinion chosen is considered a significant level of risk. Let's put the topic of saving a life aside for a moment. In regular medical cases, when one doctor says to act and another says not to, one is halachically required to act. However, Rav Moshe Sternbuch explains that when you have 2 conflicting medical opinions regarding a risky surgery, it is better to trust the more cautious opinion in order to follow the following halakhic law. Shev va'al ta'aseh adif. It is better to sit and not take action.
Therefore, in our case, the defendant must follow the first doctor's opinion and assume that there is an 8% chance of death.
But is 8% a significant level of risk?
They can perform mundane actions in a normal setting, despite the percentages involved. Rabbi Akiva Katz concludes from this that that level of risk is based on social acceptance norms rather than statistics.
We must consult medical professionals to determine what the norm is. Baruch Hashem, we have Dr. Grinder with us.
Well, Doctors Adam Grasso and Well Jabber state that high-risk procedures have an adverse cardiac event risk higher than 5%. And according to Dr. Marcel's rule, an 8% chance of death for an elective surgery is very high, because if 13 people choose to undergo the surgery, at least one of them would die.
Therefore, in this case, 8% is a significant level of risk.
Now let's discuss saving a life again. Is Michael required to disregard the 8% risk and endanger his life in order to save Judy? The Jerusalem Talmud discusses the abduction of Rabbi Mead. When disputing whether a rescue attempt should be made, Resh Lakish is willing to endanger his life to save Rabbi Mead. Rav Joseph Kara concludes from this that one is obligated to endanger his life to save another. However, interestingly enough, Rav Joseph Kara does not include this decision in his Shulchan Aruch.
The Talmud Bavli goes against Resh Lakish's statement from the Jerusalem Talmud, declaring that it is forbidden to significantly endanger one's life to save another. Rabbi Akiva Tatz explains, the definitive opinion to be followed here is that of the Babylonian Talmud, even where it seems certain that another life will be lost.
Since the opinion espoused by the Talmud Bavli takes precedence over the Jerusalem Talmud's opinion, and is supported by a long line of rabbinic decisors, including Eliyahu Rabbah, it's forbidden for Michael to significantly endanger himself by donating his bone marrow.
So, to summarize, the importance of saving a life and the safety and regeneration of bone marrow are reasons that would otherwise obligate Michael to undergo the surgery, and the discomfort experienced by the family and its defendant is not a reason to disallow the donation. However, the 8% chance of death is sufficiently dangerous for us, the Beit Din, to forbid Michael to proceed with the surgery.
Nachon. In conclusion, the Beit Din prohibits Michael from undergoing the surgery.
Raga, what if Michael would have been healthcare required to undergo the surgery? Would he then have to pay for any financial losses?
Well, we would have to divide the financial losses into two categories, given their distinct nature. Costs, including plane ticket, hospital stay, etc., and time off work, lost wages.
Let's start by discussing the costs incurred. Many halachic authorities agree that one is required to spend all of his wealth to save another life. The person who's saved must then compensate their savior.
But what about lost wages?
Financial losses resulting from time off work suggest that the defendant does not have the money he would have otherwise have earned. Therefore, this type of financial loss is not a cost. Shlomo Brody paraphrases an analysis of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, stating, Jewish law requires, when economically possible, that a person compensate his savior for the financial losses incurred in the course of the rescue.
Therefore, even though this type of financial loss is not a cost, the patient must still try to pay back her savior if she can.
Honorable judges, any questions?